I'm Gavin Clark with the National Museum of Computing and Reading Museum, and we are interviewing former employees and customers of Digital Equipment Corporation as part of the 60th anniversary of DEC opening its first office in the UK. It's December the 5th, 2023, and we are in Reading, and I'm here talking to Richard Briggs. Richard, please, let's start with some basics. Tell me just briefly your full name and your place and date of birth.
Richard John Briggs, born in Aldershot, Hampshire, 1950.
Okay. Just some background about you, first of all, your kind of, your education, where you went to school and further education, and what was the family like, and that kind of background.
Okay, well, it could be a long story. My dad was in the army, so I went to about 13 schools. Germany, Far East, Libya, Malta, England, from time to time. I had a very varied education. Eventually they put me into a boarding school because the future was bleak academically if I didn't settle down. And I actually went to a naval training school because at the time I wanted to go to sea. That's long gone now. When I left there, I did a final year at a normal school and I did A-level maths and physics. That was a decision which in hindsight was quite clever for someone who was only, whatever I was, 17 years old, because my hot subjects were geography and history. I wasn't very good at maths and physics. But I did maths and physics A-level, and guess what? I failed them. But that got me an apprenticeship with the Board of Trade, National Air Traffic Control Services, later the Civil Aviation Authority, National Air Traffic Services as they are today. And that apprenticeship was in Bletchley Park, which is interesting. I spent 2 years in Bletchley Park. The whole Enigma thing, of course, was still secret, but there were rumours flying around if you lived there long enough. I then left there and I finished my apprenticeship. I worked in the control tower at Heathrow. This was not computers. This is all basically radio communication equipment. However, it was at Heathrow in the tower that I first touched a digital PDP-11. Sorry, 8, PDP-8, which was used to process data from, they call them Daleks, at various points on the runway, which measured, it shone a light from one to the other, reflected it, depending on the ambient light. You could work out the visibility, present it in front of an air traffic controller, and he could then tell an incoming aircraft. But the only thing I ever had to do to that was occasionally it would crash, and I used to have to go up to the floor it was on with a paper tape, follow the instructions, press a few buttons, and it would reboot itself and off it would go. After that, I decided to go in the RAF to fly. So I was in the RAF for a year and a half, training to be a pilot, but that didn't work out. But that was a good period. Left there, rejoined the CAA as it was now. Did a lot of installation work, once again on radio communication systems. But I could see the light was computing. So I got the opportunity within the CAA to transfer as a trainee programmer at the London Air Traffic Control Centre, which was near Heathrow, which controlled all air traffic over the south of the UK. And turned up, there were about 8 of us. I really wanted to I knew they had a big IBM mainframe, which was like all the talk. And I wanted to get onto that. There were about 8 of us, and 4 were put on the IBM system. The other 4, including me, were put on this new project with digital PDP-11s, which didn't mean a lot to me. But I was disappointed. I guess I hadn't been on that project very long when I realised I'd actually made the right decision, or someone had made it for me. Because whereas up to that point, software was all a bit airy-fairy to me, and I really wanted to touch things and screw things. I actually found software actually really, really interesting. And so I was a programmer there for about 2 years. I did an HNC in computer studies at Reading Tech. The CAA paid for me. And then I returned the favour by leaving because we lived about quarter of a mile from the brand new DEC headquarters at Imperial Way, DEC Park. And I just thought, I was working on digital equipment, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool to get a job there? And I applied for a few jobs, and eventually in November 81, I got offered a job. And really, via takeovers by Compaq and HP, I stayed with digital until, well, HP as it turned out in the end, till 2011 when I took a redundancy package that was on offer. That's me.
So interesting, you had this very early choice, well, option of IBM versus DEC. You were disappointed. What was it about the IBM system that you thought, got to get on that, and DEC was like? I
think at that point, IBM was the place to be. I mean, we were talking 1978. Certainly if you didn't know a lot about computers, which I didn't, everyone had heard of IBM. They were also sending people to the US for a year's formal hardware training on IBM. And even IBM engineers don't get that. And a lot of my fellow ex-apprentices did that. And they also left shortly after and got well-paid jobs with companies like Amdahl and was it Harris Computers and people like that, IBM. But I mean, I guess the salutary moment was, as I said, the CA paid for all of us to do an HNC here at Reading. And I can remember it very well, Fortran. So we learnt Fortran. And us on the digital stuff would go back and during lunch break at work, sit down on a VT100, bash in the code, assemble it, task build it, compile it, error, correct it, error. By the end of the lunch, we'd done our week's homework. The guys in the IBM had to get it punch carded, put it on a remote job entry system, up to wherever it was processed. The results came back a day later. They were very lucky to get their homework done in a week. And I thought, the future is digital. So that's when I realised that this was definitely the right decision. And it was also, I say to young people these days, getting a job with digital then was like getting a job with, if one of your kids came in and said, Dad, I got a job with Google or Apple, you'd be pretty impressed, wouldn't you? Digital was like that. And people took a pay cut to join digital. I did. Salesman, commission-based salesman joined digital. There was no commission.
Why was, from your perspective, as a relative outsider, a new person to digital, you got your first taste of digital systems, and actually using the stuff. Did you know much about the company? To form this opinion?
Only via the fact that I worked on their equipment, and I'd met, obviously, maintenance engineers, people come in and install software and that sort of thing, and they were all young. I remember this very well. When I was in the CA, it was effectively a civil service. You'd go to lunch, and even at the age of 27, you'd be one of the youngest on the table. I remember when I was in digital, I'd only a couple of months, and you go out for Friday lunchtime drinks, as everyone did in those days, down the pub at Friday lunchtime. And I just remember looking around, and there's about 8 people, and apart from my boss, I was the oldest. And that continued right through my career. When I finished, I was, how old was I? 60. And I was working with 28, 30s, early 40s people. So it was a young company. That was the other thing. It was just, and I think it keeps you young as well when you're working with young people. Sort of generally.
How did, I suppose, this young culture manifest itself around you? Was it just the way people related to each other, the ideas that were coming through, the management style?
I've written some bullet points on a bit of paper just in case we forget. But no, I didn't really. The only comparison I could make was my time in effectively the civil service, right? Even though the CAA had moved off the civil service, it was still very civil service in its culture. I mean, there were so many things, like everyone was hung up in the CAA about whether you had a degree or not. They had on the door, if they had an office, the BSc, MSc, everything, business cards, a string of letters after the name. In digital, there was none of that. No, I never saw a business card with anyone's qualifications on it. Things like, once again, in the CAA, there were car park slots for the senior managers. I won't say digital as a whole, but certainly Digital UK, or Digital Equipment Company Limited, actually, was a subsidiary of Digital Equipment Corporation. Certainly here, things like that, which was like a breath of fresh air, you know. But I didn't have experience of other companies, so perhaps all American multinationals, IBM, Hewlett-Packard at the time, perhaps they were the same, you know. But that was the big difference for me, was this young go, you know. What was it? One of the worst thing in digital was to do nothing. You know, they'd rather you did it wrong than do nothing, within reason.
Tell me, let's go back then. So what was the first? So you've gone for a job at Digital. What was the job you went for?
The first job I went for was in a place called Viables, which is in Basingstoke, which is their telephone support centre for the UK.
And did you see a job advertised?
I can't really remember. I think I saw it advertised. I applied for it. I went for an interview, but I didn't get the job because what I didn't realise was I was working on real-time radar processing systems, right? I didn't even know how a printer worked. We didn't have printers. You know, they asked me what I realised later on, very basic questions about how you control a printer. You know, in software terms, things called X on, X off, if you've got any. I had no idea, you know, because I wasn't working on that sort of stuff. I was working on real-time, no disks, you know, real-time radar. You know, I mean, stuff had to be tested till the cows come home. People's lives depended on it. That was a big shock even when I joined Digital. They did testing, but it's not like we did it in the CAA. But then I realised, yeah, but people's lives don't depend on it here. So
you didn't get the first job you applied for?
I didn't get the first.
You might have applied for the wrong job.
I basically applied for the wrong job.
Based on your skills, yeah.
But I didn't get that job. But what actually happened, they obviously, something impressed them about me because they kept my name on their books, because must have been a few months later, I had a call, would I like to go for an interview for a job in Digital? Oh, yeah, that sounds good. So I went for another job, which I got, which was, once again, in hindsight, I realised some years after I moved on from that job, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was in a group that my job title was maintainability engineer.
That's the job you were given?
Yeah.
Right.
And my wife to this day takes the mickey out of me because of that job title. What it was you can imagine, and this was in digital software engineering. There's actually part of the corporate engineering empire stretching back to the US. So it wasn't actually, I was paying conditions were UK, but I was actually part of the corporate engineering group. And basically the philosophy was, you've got all these amazing software engineers with brains the size of planets, you know, and they're producing all this fancy, if you let them loose, they produce all this fancy stuff using the latest and greatest, and it would go out to the field, and, you know, the average field service engineer would have no idea. You know, it was, so our job was to make sure that what was coming out of engineering was maintainable, economically maintainable. There was a similar group for hardware as well. And so I was involved with Office products, word processing, email, DEC Talk, which was the thing that, if you know that, what's his name, the guy in the wheelchair used. What's his name? Stephen Hawking used that initially. I don't know if he used it all the time. So a load of products. They were engineered out of Reading in DEC Park, and there was a group there responsible for the maintainability of what was coming out. The great thing about this job was you'd be exposed to someone has a bright idea somewhere in the corporation, and there would be sort of like, can't remember what the document was, but it was a sort of I've got a bright idea sort of thing, and it would circulate around, and you think, oh, yeah. You didn't really have much input at that point, but you could monitor it, because the next thing that would happen would be some business. Is there a business for this thing if we were to build it, and the business requirements? And then we would start getting visibility of this, because that may impact how it should be maintained. And then you get on to market requirements and functional requirements, and then the technical design, the actual production of the software, the testing of it, right through even till after it shipped, and measuring how it actually was doing in the field in terms of being maintained. So, but when I moved, I did a bit of programming there, but it wasn't really part of the job.
So how would you do your job? How would you would evaluate ideas or new technologies?
You would typically have review sign-off on all specifications associated with that future product, ranging from the business requirements. We didn't really have a lot to add there, but you could start to think, well, if this goes forward, this is going to be shipping into a very non-technical customer base. Therefore, they're saying, it has to be installable by the customer who won't have any technical knowledge. Therefore, with a maintainability hat on, you just started thinking along these lines. And then, as the thing developed into, the various levels of specification, the next one, the obvious one, was a functional specification. What's it actually going to do? And then you could formulate your own thinking and sign it off. But it's generally, when it really got interesting from a direct point of view, when it got down to the design of the product and how it was going to be packaged, even things like labeling and language, if it was going to be shipped abroad. But the great thing about it, I moved on from that after 3 years.
Didn't you mention something about products were the language issue, that they were going to markets where they weren't speaking the language, the documentation was written in?
Well, yeah, that's one of the things that caused me to move on. Because I remember it very well. PCs came out, and Digital had a load of PCs. And one of the things, they set up a group in Reading to, no, it wasn't PCs. That basically anyone who worked for Digital had to be able to speak English. But there were exceptions, and they were called terminal engineers. These were people who fixed keyboards and VT100s. They didn't have to speak if they were in France or Germany or wherever. And but everyone else had to speak English, so there was never any requirement to translate documentation for, VAX VMS or PDP-11s or stuff like that. But when the PC came out, they decided these were going to be maintained in the field by terminal engineers. And we sort of cried, well, hold on, none of them can speak English, so you need to produce documentation in French, about 9 languages. And there was this big sort of debate going on at high level about whether and eventually Digital decided it wasn't going to do that. And I remember thinking, that's such a clear-cut case of something costing more to maintain. And I then, this was probably, late 80s. And I thought, if ever the hammer comes down and redundancies start coming in, I've got a feeling this group we're in is going to be one of the first in line. I think I began to realise it was more of a figurehead type thing. And so that's when I started thinking about the future, and that caused me to move into a different job within the company. Just
finish on the PC. Was there any blowback on that decision to have the PC? Because we know the PC business didn't do terribly well ultimately.
No, no, I not that I was aware of. I mean, I was probably too low level if there was any blowback. But there were other things, like I remember it very well. They set up an organisation called Digital Classified Software. This was all for third-party software that ran on our PCs. And we had a catalogue, and it would all be approved by Digital and stuff like that. And I was a part of the group that was evaluating a lot of this software, and most of it failed. The stringent criteria that Digital laid down for this software to run on their PCs. And I remember at the time seeing an Apple equivalent. And I always remember their catalogue, very glossy, very thick. And it simply said, Apple believes this software will run on their platforms. But, you know, don't come crying to us if it doesn't, which is the model we have today. You don't, if you, I don't know, if Adobe packs up on your PC, you don't complain to Microsoft, do you? You go, but digital was, in my view, still in its sort of VAX, PDP, commercial computing, where indeed the customer did expect you to carry the CAM for everything. And I think that's one of the reasons why. So the result was our third-party catalogue was that thick. Yeah, but at least the stuff in it we guaranteed would work, and we would carry the CAM if it didn't.
Why was that important to guarantee that for customers?
I think it was a legacy of where we'd come from. You know, because you know, if you were shipping VAX VMS, you'd have your own database products, proprietary database products, for example, email products, stuff like Office, and you would commit to the customer that you know, that they would work, and if they didn't, we would fix it. So I think when we started to bring third-party products on for the PCs, that mentality was still there, but the world had moved on.
But it was important, it seems, to have had this level of workability. I mean, we heard that hardware would fail at some point and software will fail. Obviously, DEC was going into places where that couldn't happen, even though the market for PCs was quite small at the time and the user base was quite small, but people had a high expectation, didn't they? And this is where the DEC's dependability sort of came from.
You're probably right there, because at that time, probably most PCs were being sold into companies which had traditionally, in Digital's case, bought digital VMS, PDP-11s and stuff like that. And so they'd had this very good impression of digital, and maybe digital was thinking we need to carry that tradition along with PCs. That will differentiate us from Apple, for example. But of course, what happened is it went into people's houses, didn't it? And the world was different there.
So you had this very interesting role, was it maintainability engineer? That's a very interesting intersection to be at, isn't it? Between the high idea concept world and innovation and making it work in the field. Again, another thing DEC was clearly wanting to get right for the sake of the customer.
I mean, the reason for me personally, that job was so valuable is when I did move on, I went out to the field. I worked in pre-sales then, supporting salesmen. And I realised I'd learned the whole life cycle of a software product, you know. And yet you've got guys in the field, salesmen, other pre-sales consultants who had not worked in that environment. You know, I'd talk about business requirements, market requirements, and all this sort of stuff. I had a clue what you're talking about, you know. And I thought, because I've had 3 years training in how you, from the inception, someone's bright idea through to actually shipping a product and upgrading it and stuff like that. So that was, I realised, a very good job for me. It helped to set the course for my future career in IT, which was not really that technical, even though I was ostensibly a technical person. I was never actually that technical. I failed my A-levels, didn't I?
Well, let's go back, so where did you go after the maintainability engineer? Because you had a few times, you were in the field supporting, I think.
So no, not after that. Well, when I started looking around for an alternate job within the company, I didn't want to leave digital, that's certain. And that was another thing, you see. I've got these things written down in case I forget. When I was in the CAA and told them I was leaving, I'd already made up my mind that I was going to do my utmost to help the transition from me, the 3 months notice or whatever I had to give, to whoever was going to take my place. Because I felt really bad, because they trained me, paid for me to do an HNC, taken me back after I left the RAF, and here I was doing the dirty on them. But my boss was so upset that I was leaving that I thought, to hell with it. You know, but when I joined digital, what I found at about this time, after 3 years, they almost expected you to change job every 3 years to give you the experience of the company. And when I mooted the fact that to my boss in digital that I'd like to move on to a different job, he actually helped me. He said, "Well, I know someone. What sort of job do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I don't want to be a salesman, but, you know, work in the sales environment. What you want is pre-sales. I know someone." And through that, I got an interview and I changed jobs, and that happened. I worked in marketing, I worked in various other sort of projects, systems integration. It was just almost expected that you'd change. They'd almost ask, if you've been in a job 5 years, questions would be asked. Why? Yeah. So I went out to the field, I call it the field, because this was for digital equipment company, so I was now working for DEC UK. And I got a job in Ministry of Defence pre-sales. So that was a sales group selling to the Ministry of Defence. So you had a team of salesmen, and supporting them, you'd have a load of what's called pre-sales consultants. Digital had so much technology, a salesman couldn't possibly go and talk about any of it all. So I specialised in networks and communications. So if they wanted someone to go and talk to them about, Richard, can you come and talk to my customer about the latest version of DECnet or whatever it was, then I would go out with the salesman, and typically if there was an ITT issued, you'd do the networking part of it. Other people would do the servers, operating system, that sort of thing. So that was my first role out there. And fundamentally, that's what I continued to do for the rest of my working life, but at a different level. So whereas initially I was like the networking person on a bid, say, eventually I became the design authority for the bid. So you'd have a salesman, a bid manager, which is a project manager, to manage the whole thing, finances and everything, and the design authority who would lead maybe 6 or 8 specialists in their areas. And that's what I eventually found myself doing, just gradually working my way up as I got more experience. And that was a good job for me because, as I said, I wasn't that technical, and it was all about understanding customers' requirements. I remember the sort of scenario would happen, you'd be speaking to a customer and they say, I'd really like to speak to one of your engineers about product X. Okay, so you really want to speak to an engineer. So we get an engineer in, and I can see myself now, there'll be 3 customers sitting there, the engineer here, me here, just like we are now really. And the engineer would just be talking away gobbledygook. And I'd look at these customers and, they're senior IT people, but it was, and I remember, used to sort of, hold on, John, because I knew enough about what he was talking about to be able to translate almost. I say, are you actually saying that if A equals B, then C equals D? Yes, Richard. Ah, thank you. I would act as this go-between. It was because I knew enough technically to understand what they were talking about. Well, I wasn't the expert by any means on what they were talking about. And that was a niche, I think. Probably since I retired, I realised that was my niche. And
it's interesting that we hear about, to kind of pick up on your experience, we hear a lot about DEC granting, there's kind of the DEC way, which I don't know if you're aware of this conversation about, like, there was a sense of people had a huge degree of latitude, a huge degree of autonomy, freedom.
Yes.
You weren't told what to do, but a goal would be set out. I mean, did this work? Did you feel this? Did we say that work? They translated to you?
It's funny you should say that. One of the points, though. I was never apart from once, and that was in my last days. By this time, HP had taken over. I was never ever told to do anything in digital.
How did it work?
You would be asked in a very pointed manner. Would it be possible, Richard, if by next Friday you could do X, Y, Z? You knew that was they want me to do that, but I was never actually told, straight in an aggressive way. And the one time it did happen was like 25 years after I'd been in the company. By this time I was in HP. And I remember registering the fact I'd just been ordered to do something. It was a big shock. That was that culture. People said working for digital was like working on a university campus. It was very casual. I'm not saying it all. I mean, they expected you to do the job. So no one monitored your timekeeping, whether you were in at 1 minute past 9 or not. But they certainly measured, whether you've done the job or not. And they expect you to work all hours to get it done for no extra money. There's no overtime, you know.
So how would goals were set? How would you be, a direction be set out, and how would you get there? Would you do it under your own initiative? Would there be targets and, you know, figures to reach, or how would, given there's no one told you what to do, or?
Well, we had to book our, I mean, sales I was never a salesman, right? I worked in a sales environment, and no doubt salesmen did have very rigid goals, which at the end of the year, not when they made the sale, would be taken into account when they had a salary review. For me, it was, you had to record your time against an approved code. So if you worked on a bid, the bid manager would sort out a code, and everyone working on it would be given a code. And every week you'd have to log your hours for the week and say what code you were logging those hours to. And yeah, if you didn't have anything to log your hours against, then you need to worry. So you would fish around and make sure you found something to do. But was I my own boss?
Yeah, did you have a sense of personal responsibility, this autonomy? So it seems like a lot of people, like you say, they weren't told what to do, but they were given a lot. They were allowed to amass responsibility, and they were trusted to do these things.
Yeah. One of the things I realised about that particular job, that pre-sales job, which is basically what I did, and projects throughout the rest of my working life, you didn't have to be very self-motivated. You were driven by events. You know, so you'd be sitting there minding your own business, and a bid manager would call you, Richard, ITT's just come in from British Telecom, got 5 weeks to answer it. We reckon it's 100 million. We need you to lead the team and help me put together a team of technical people. Who are the best people in the service? Can we get hold of them? You know, and so you didn't have to be motivate yourself. You were motivated now, and you know, that was the sort of job you were driven by what was happening in terms of the business. So I didn't go out and look for business, for example. That was the salesman's job. But as soon as he spotted an opportunity, he would be likely to call me in just to verify it. Is this a good deal technically? Can we do it? Have we got the products?
But you found your kind of plate sort of filling up in this way, and
I found it. I mean, a lot of this in hindsight. You think about this after you retired and think back over your working life, and you realise that I never had to really be self-motivated at work, because the motivation was always coming through the door. You know, you dreaded that call, you know, on your phone on a Monday morning. Especially, you know, the last 3 years, I took an international job, same job basically, and yeah, you just get a call on a Monday morning in some foreign accent. Richard, can you come to Turkey? When? Tomorrow? Why? We've got to get a bid in to some Turkish telecoms company, and we've got 10 days to do it. And so you get on a plane and off you go, you know, and then you get really into it.
And was this kind of an exciting environment to work in, or like a very tense environment to work in?
No, it was. It had its moments. There's no question. I mean, some very stressful bids and projects I worked on. But mostly I enjoyed it. Yeah. One of the things I remember, I've written my own autobiography for the family, because I've had an interesting life, army life, RAF, naval school I went to, which was an anomaly. And when you write things down, a lot of things about yourself come very clear. And one of the things I'd often thought, yeah, why didn't I sort of rise up to the dizzy heights of, you know, sort of director level? You know, why didn't I never aspire to even do that? I obviously haven't got any ambition. And then I was writing this down, these thoughts, and I thought, I did have ambition, but not as you know it. My ambition was to enjoy my work. And that's why when I was in this pre-sales job, I can remember various managers I had wondering why I wasn't considering moving into sales. It was like a training ground to work in sales or project management. And I remember thinking, because I don't think I'd be very good at either. I'd be okay as a salesman, but my experience of observing salesmen, and I've seen more salesmen come unstuck than you've had hot dinners. My experience as salesman was, it's no good being average. You've got to be good if you're going to hold down your job. And I knew that I wasn't good enough. I was too soft really to really hold a sales job down. Project management, I'm very good at managing things. However, in an environment like that, project management includes finance. And if there's one thing that turns me off completely, it's anything to do with money. So I didn't make either of those moves. I just stayed in a job that I enjoyed. It had its moments, but my compromise was I had to go up a few levels to earn a good salary. So I made that compromise. Well, go up to that. I know the higher you go, the more crap you get, but I'm willing to take that much for that much money.
So you found a level that was good for you within DEC.
Yeah.
I noticed you said that it's interesting, and you work with lots of different types of people. You said that you'd left school with just the 6 O-levels, but in the 29 years at DEC, didn't feel that it didn't hold you back in any way.
It did not. That's the great thing. I don't think anyone cared. They probably didn't even look at your quality. It may have been different if I'd gone into pure engineering, yeah. But in the environment I was in, they really didn't. I suspect to get the job, they looked long and hard at my fortune. I suspect that HNC I got probably helped me. But once you got the job, it was what you did from there that counted. It's like I told my daughters, get your degree and you'll go in there. But where you go from there, it's nothing to do with your degree. It's your personality and your drive and enthusiasm.
What kind of people, what kind of backgrounds were you working with from what sort of educational levels and tiers?
Mostly graduate people, mostly graduates. And that's, which once again is a great thing about digital. It never mattered. Did I actually know whether someone was a graduate? No, I didn't. But if I thought long and hard about it, I thought, yeah, they probably got, not necessarily in computing either. It might be. One of the things about the environment I worked in, they would recruit people with degrees in anything. Their logic was, if you've got a degree in archaeology, that says you're a certain type of person, able to pick up things. Obviously, if you're going to be a software engineer or something, archaeology isn't going to help you there. But it was. I never ever. I got up to as senior as you could get in the job title. I was, without moving out of that job into sales or something.
Do you think that? DEC is quite known for having this quite supportive culture of its staff. And you mentioned management always kind of looking out for you. If you're seeing the same job within 3 years' time, did you see other colleagues getting kind of like sort of supported in this kind of way as well, or moved on in this kind of paternal kind of way?
It wasn't. I wouldn't overplay that. It wasn't paternal. It wasn't like. But probably in your annual review, your manager would say, "So where do you see yourself in a year's time, Richard?" Or whoever it was, and then there might be a discussion. Well, have you ever thought moving into? Well, I can remember it. My manager saying those very words about, "Have you ever thought about moving into sales?" You've been working with salesmen now for 2 or 3 years. You've got lots of experience of working with customers. You've just never carried the can for, or project management. So there was always this, this sort of expectation that you would move on to something new and broaden your horizons, really. And
you mentioned the work, your work led you to working in telecoms, especially. Now this is at the sort of this is at the early days of the web and the internet, isn't it? Anyway, so what were you involved in there? How some projects you were working on?
Well, I don't know if I told you on the Zoom call, but I had my wife to thank for this. So what kept me in a job? I never lost my job. I survived the takeover by Compaq. In fact, I didn't just survive it, it just didn't happen as far as I was concerned. I survived the takeover of HP because I was working in telecoms. So we go back to 1993. and I got hold of a floppy disk. I had a work laptop, and I plugged it into my 9600 phone line and followed the instructions, and there were 6 websites that you could access, one of which was the Sydney Botanical Gardens. This was at home, and I double click on an image and it will get bigger. Click, and this Kookaburra image sort of boom, comes up. Staggering, all the way from Australia. And I called my wife in and said, sit here. No work computers, no nothing. Anyone with a laptop can do this. And I demonstrated it, and watch what happens when I click that. Comes up, and she said, and I quote, she said, it's a bit slow. And I said, a bit slow? That's just copied 36,000 bytes of information across the world. And as these words came out of my mouth, I thought, God, she's right. That's bugger all use to anyone. And when I went in on Monday, I had a choice of working on a bid for GlaxoSmithKline or a year's on the job. They sold me into a startup telecoms company called Energis, which was an offshoot of the electricity board. And I thought, that's the place to be, telecoms. So I took that opportunity, and that was it. I stayed in telecoms, that was 93, and I was still in telecoms when I finished work in 2011. When Compaq took us over, I heard this happened at a senior management meeting. Compaq senior management toured around. And so, what's all this OSS, BSS? That's Operation Support. This is slang for telecoms. So it was explained what it was. Do they sell PCs? No. Yeah. Laptops? No. Do they make money? Yeah, last year they made $500 million, whatever it was. Okay, carry on, next. And that was it for Compaq. Never touched us. HP was a bit like coming home, culturally. It was like a relief, because we were only Compaq for about 3 years, I think. When HP took us over, it was like coming home. It was almost like DEC. Not quite, but almost. But they didn't really have any presence in this area digital had worked in telecoms. So once again, we just carried on as normal.
So can you tell us about some of the because DEC was obviously quite important in the early days of telecoms, and they had representation, I think, on ICANN and other boards, and this equipment was running the internet. How were you kind of involved in it? Were you involved in some of those projects?
The first project I worked on, I literally worked on site in Energis in Southwark in London, and that was. Do you realise I can't actually remember what I did there, but it was basically one of the team. I was basically sold in as a contractor, really. That's what it was. But it gave me the opportunity to learn telecoms. What Digital developed was a product called TMIT, Telecommunications Management Information Platform. And it was a core piece of software where you had what they called access modules, which interfaced to things, presentation modules, which presented things, and data, I can't remember what they're called now, data module that stored the data. So, for example, you could use it to bring up alarms from your network, process them, do clever things with them, present them, and monitor alarms or performance figures, or you could use it for anything. But the great thing about it was highly scalable. You could daisy chain these things together, and create an enormously scalable management solution, which you couldn't do with standard off-the-shelf data management. These were monitoring things like SCH, PDH networks, ATM, frame relay, all this sort of stuff.
So these are big networks. He's managing.
These are big networks.
This is the real bread and butter of the internet.
Yeah. So probably the first thing, the big project I worked on was for BT, and they literally came to us and said, we've got this problem. We've got all this PDH, SDH stuff all over the country. Digger goes through a cable somewhere. We get alarms everywhere, but no idea where the fault is. Is there anything we can do? And so we proposed our product with a module that actually did some clever. They had a very good naming convention in BT, so you could use that to actually work out things. And we won this big project in BT to do fault management, and off that we won a number of projects for performance statistics using the same product. This was engineered in the south of France. And but probably my claim to fame was the BT came to us in about 97 and said, "Can we meet you?" Yes, okay. So a crowd of us got together, and they said, "Right, we've got this problem. We've got this new technology coming along called ADSL, and currently it's all about telephone lines and provisioning of. Currently, it takes us 6 weeks to provision a new phone, and it did. I remember we moved in our house in 93. 93? Yeah, our last house. No, the house before, 84. It's 6 weeks before we had a phone, right? And they told us this has to be automated. Can you help us? We of course said yes. I remember when they left, we all, what the hell's ADSL? It's broadband to you and I. And we had a proof of concept that we could build a system between their order handling system and the element management systems from companies like Fujitsu, Ericsson, and people like that, and automate the whole sort of order processing down to the exchange level. So we did a proof of concept, and they were happy with that. And away we went. And the last time I spoke to anyone in HP, whenever you have a BT broadband connection provisioned, it's still using. It's changed out of all recognition, but it is still using that system we put way back. Yeah, so we had this product, Digital had this product called TMIP, which was just, it could be used for any management function within the telecoms network. And no one else had that. So which is why when Compaq took us over, okay, carry on. Makes money, that's an important thing. And similarly HP had OpenView, but they were all data management for IT type stuff. They didn't scale for telecoms networks.
Were you aware of what was going on at the time? I suppose the scale of what you were involved in today, you can look back and say it was the birth of the internet.
Broadband?
But, yeah, were you aware of anything? No.
Were any of us?
No.
No. They obviously knew, because they knew that there must be no manual from someone taking your order and hitting the submit button. There must be no manual operation in provisioning this to the customer. Otherwise, it would take forever. So I worked on a number of those projects for BT. And another big one was not related to that product at all, but later on, because of the boom in telecoms, Vodafone came to us and said, "We have this problem." And the problem was they had completely lost track of what equipment they had. So they'd send an engineer out to a base station to put an extra card in for a bit more capacity and get out there, driven 3 hours on top of some mountain somewhere. No slots left. And so they needed an inventory system for their whole network. And we worked with a company called Kramer, which was a British company based in Bath. I think they're now owned by Amdocs. And we delivered this inventory solution to Vodafone for their networks. And that was a massive project. So by this time, the way I was working was typically, I'd work on the bid. If we won it, I'd then work on the project for the first 6 months. And by that time, I'd probably run out of my usefulness because it was getting very technical now and I really wasn't there. But I was able to sort of be the seamless transition, if you like, between the requirements and then you get the really good engineers on board. And then after that, I'd move off onto the next opportunity. And that was great because I could stand up in front of the next customer. And like I was taken to China as a result of that inventory thing. And we went around several Chinese telecoms companies. And I was able to stand up and say, not we, I have done this, And that was really credible for selling something onto the next thing.
Did you have a sense of who the competition was at the time, who DEC was competing against for these projects?
I don't think there were. Everyone was there, you know, but I don't think they had the products, which is why we did so well in BT. You know, I didn't work on all these, but we delivered provisioning for broadband ADSL, as it was called, which was me, but also ATM and frame relay. We had a performance management. I didn't get involved in that at all based on this Teamint project, taking performance stats and basically monitoring them, and the fault management system I talked about. They were all big BT projects. There never seemed to be anyone with a credible. The biggest competition actually was the telecom providers. So I remember the ADSL one. Fujitsu was one of the suppliers to BT, probably still is. And they, of course, they had what they called element managers to control their equipment, but they wanted to move up the stack. So if there was Ericsson, as there was, they wanted to be able to move up the stack and manage Ericsson as well. And Ericsson similarly wants to move up the stack. And that I don't think any telecoms company within their right mind would allow that to happen. So
you could be a trusted partner.
We were a trusted partner, yeah, exactly. So, but we'd obviously have to work closely with those people should we win the contract. But they're thinking about it, and it's an interesting question that I can never remember having any competitive close calls with any of the IT companies. It was always the telecoms companies, Siemens, Nortel, when they existed. Yeah, but that was good. I enjoyed that. So my job after I left that maintainability engineering was really started off in pre-sales, where I was just the networking person, the DECnet typically, on a bid. You know, there'd be a server guy, there'd be whatever other software database, you know. And then as I moved up, I took control of, I'd probably still dabble in the networking bit, but I'd have a specialist there who was up to date on everything. And then I'd be overall in charge of the technical solution.
One of the interesting projects you were involved in was the MOD and
Yes.
the Navy and a system called Oasis.
That's right, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
That was the first thing I got involved in after I left engineering. And so I was in MOD pre-sales, and the Navy, or MOD on behalf of the Navy, issued an ITT for, they wanted an administrative system for their ships, you know, word processing, stores accounting, and they issued this ITT for Oasis, which was onboard accounting and stores inventory, I think, system. And I was asked to work with the salesman on the bid and talking to the customer and stuff like that. And it was, when was this? So this was, oh dear, God, I'm struggling with the year it was. And the reason it's important is because halfway through this bid, selling, we go down and the MOD guy we're dealing with puts a Computer Weekly or something in front of us. What's all this about Ken Olsen saying Unix is snake oil? Because they're requirements for Unix. And we were, like the rest of the deck was, what? Unix? And, you know, so we were quite far ahead of the game here. And yeah, so we were trying to say how our version of Unix was the best thing since sliced bread, basically. And we go down there, and there's this headline, one of the computer papers, Ken Olsen, our Lord and Master, reckons Unix was snake oil. So we had to sell around that. But we didn't win that on price, really. In fact, when we lost it, the staff down there, one or two of them, the salesman said, were absolutely appalled with digital, because you have to remember, on the customer side, they were all steeped in digital. You know, they knew digital equipment. They were almost as true blue digital as as I was, you know, and they felt they'd been let down because now they were going to be sold this rubbish system which was cheap as chips from someone who'd won on price, basically.
Was DEC? This is an interesting time for DEC because there's the rise of the personal computer.
Yeah.
You know, Ken's saying this about Unix, which we all know became Linux, and we all know how that ended up. That it's now starting to kind of slightly become out of sync with the customers, where the customer is.
Yeah, obviously I'm not an expert here because I'm as low down on all this. But from my perspective, I mean, there's an interesting. I had been sold Unix as a result of this bid because I always remember they specified a word processing package called Lex 11, and we had to put on demo. And so the man from, I can't remember the company now, Lex 11 came in to install Unix, not Unix, Lex 11 on our Unix platform we'd set up for him. And he came in and he installed this, and the version of, it was called Pro Venix. It was on a small PDP-11. And he'd say, oh yeah, well, I'll put this on Ultrix then. That was the mainstream digital offering, Ultrix. And I said, it's not Ultrix, it's Pro Venix. Okay. 20 minutes later, he walked out, it's all working. And his final comments was, he was still talking about Ultrix. And I realized that this guy had come in, installed a product on a hardware platform he'd never seen before, on an operating system he didn't even know the name of, and it worked. And I thought, try doing that between MVS and VMS or anything else. And I suddenly saw the light. And I remember going to a marketing meeting, just a general marketing meeting, a presentation they were giving, and they were talking about market share of the company. So, thing that there's IBM sort of 35%, Digital Equipment Corporation 30%, HP sort of 10%, and then all these others. Little, and I remember this marketing guy sort of saying, just ignoring the others, because obviously the competition was IBM there. And I remember looking at all these others, thinking Unix. I said, no, I thought that diagram's wrong. It's 30% IBM, whatever it was, 30% digital, 50% Unix. And I remember that very well.
So the DEC is slightly going out of sync with the market, and also, but there was a sense, wasn't there, that it came from the top. Ken thought that the products were superior, and they were in many ways, but he didn't want to get involved in the PC market because he wanted to build the best PC, not a commodity PC. Did this kind of, obviously this was a culture that was around, very much alive in the company, like the marketing guy who had the downer on the Unix market, for example. You saw this in action, it sounds like. It filtered down to a low level.
They were blind to what's happening. As I said, all they could see was IBM and all these other non-players. But no, they weren't non-players because they were all Unix vendors. Long since gone, of course, most of them. But I always remember that, and also asking a question about, and the same one, asking a question about Unix. And most people in the room looked at me, what the hell's, why is he talking about that piece of rubbish university software? Which it was, by the way. VMS was far, far superior. But these things don't count often.
This return back to slightly happy times. Let's talk about sort of DEC, and you worked in the Reading area. What were the buildings you worked at in around the Reading area? Okay,
so when I joined that first job in the engineering group, the maintainability group, was in Acre Road, which was still there, the building, a small room. And that was part of corporate engineering. And then we moved, the group got bigger when we were doing this PC software, for example. And we moved into DEC Park, which was, did you ever see pictures or, that was a massive building. I mean, you went in and there was this thing called the street, right, which went the whole length of the building, about 3 stories up. We had a bank, Barclays Bank, Hogg Robinson travel agent, a shop. It was just amazing. I worked there, and then when I left that and moved into pre-sales, I went down to Basingstoke, and then when I got into telecoms, they were originally based down in near Fareham. We have a building there. That didn't last long. We moved all up to Deck Park in Reading, which was great because it was near my home. And then after that would have been about 94, 93, 94. And that's where I stayed until HP took us over and dust had settled and they sold the building and we moved to Bracknell.
What was the campus like? You described it physically. Was there what was the atmosphere like on campus? Vibrant, energetic?
Oh,
you mentioned the corridor. What was the how big was the importance of the corridor?
It was massive. I mean, it was a street. I mean, you could have driven cars left and right down it. And it had a bank, it had a shop, for milk, just a little shop for that, all that sort of stuff. A travel agent, Hogg Robinson, so if you were going, that was mainly for business travel, of course, but you could go and book your own holiday there. It had coffee tables set down there. There was, at one point we had a external, what was it, those coffee vendors, I've seen them at Reading Station, begins with an A. We had them in the street. You had to pay for it, but it was very cheap, It was just like, I've never been to university, but people said it was like being on a university campus, and it was. It was a great environment to work in. Don't think I appreciated it at the time, but maybe I did. Because I remember many times sitting there thinking, my God, to think where I used to work at London Air Traffic Control Centre. It was like another world. What
was it? Did that help make things a productive environment? Did that bring people together, do you think?
Well, yes, it did. And there's another, it's funny you should say that because being an IT company, we were one of the very early work from home things. So if we go to 86, people didn't work regularly at home then, but sometimes I had a design job to do. I remember for a network for Barclays, and I just couldn't do it at work. I need peace and quiet, and so I'd go home and do it at home. But I didn't have any connectivity to work. I just say, look, I'll be working at home. Give us a ring if you need me. But in, when was it? 87, the hurricane, the big hurricane. That's the year it was. We're sitting in one of the buildings in Basingstoke, and we had 2 or 3 buildings in Basingstoke. Looking south, talking to a project manager, and we saw a huge pile of smoke in the distance, and we thought, that's the M3. Big crash on the M3. The pile of smoke got bigger, and we thought, that is a big crash on the M3. And then we get people sort of saying, I can't get through to such and such system. And then gradually we realised it's one of our buildings on fire. One of our buildings burnt down, and the other side of near the M3, the Basingstoke. Now, no one was injured or anything, but the building was written off. But they managed to relocate everyone to different offices where there were spare desks. And because the big thing about digital computing, it was distributed, yeah? So, you just carried on as normal. And they made a big thing of this from a marketing point of view. And but then clearly someone somewhere said, hold on, how many employees did we have in that building? 500. So we managed to sit them all in desks around Reading and Basingstoke the next day almost. Yes. And how much is office space, a square foot? And this was all empty. And that's when things changed. They started introducing desk sharing. So you no longer had your own desk. You came in with your laptop, you found a desk, you plugged it in. Everything worked. And then increasingly working from home became the norm. But in my view, that had, and still does, this is what I have a big issue with, is it kills team spirit. Because I can remember working on a particular thing in Basingstoke, and I was working all hours, and I was having to ring up my wife at 5 o'clock and say, sorry, Dale, I won't be home for dinner, 11. You know, there was a few sense of humour losses there. And I can remember, you know, on a bad time thinking, why the hell am I doing this for the company? You know, I didn't get a particularly good pay rise this year. You know. And then I realised I wasn't doing it for the company at all. I was doing it for the team I was in. I didn't, you know, maybe 8 of us working on this. I didn't want to be the person letting everyone down.
How important was the team culture at DEC?
I think it was very important. I think it's very important anywhere. And what I noticed when home working really took off, and it took off in HP, I suppose, long before it's become commonplace. To my mind, it killed that team spirit. You know, people did their job, but you know, I can't help thinking that you need to develop a team spirit, and the only way to do that is people physically near each other.
Well, it's still about the concentration of people who were in Reading, and you mentioned Park One. How integrated would you say was DEC in Reading? Because obviously in the US, when we talk about tech campuses, they're out of town, they're off the freeway, and they have their own companies, the banks are on campus. Here, it's a very metropolitan area. Was DEC removed from Reading? Did the Readingites see
I think
DEC?
Well, I can't speak for
from your perspective,
average person, but everyone knew about digital. Or actually, there's a problem. You know, we had customers come one day, got off the train at the station, asked the taxi driver to take them to DEC. Of course, the taxi driver says yes. He drives around aimlessly for it seems like forever until these customers start sort of questioning him. And it turns out he didn't realise that digital was DEC. If they'd said digital, he would have known exactly where to go. No, I think it was very, very much part of the you know, as I was saying, before I joined digital and lived in Reading, I saw these cars with, we have seen the pyramids at DEC Park. And it was a take on, we have seen the lions at Longleat. You know, Longleat down in, was it Wiltshire? If you'd been to the safari park, you had this sticker that said, we have seen the lions at Longleat. This one's, we have seen the pyramids. Because DEC Park was a series of pyramids, the roof, and they'd had a massive, when it had opened, they'd had a massive open day for the whole public. And there was this was before I joined, so I didn't go, but all sorts of attractions and everything. And they had all these stickers, sticking on their cars, we have seen the pyramids at DEC Park. So that was probably indicative of at least how digital wanted to integrate into this area. One of the things that, remember I said one of my jobs I ended up down near Fareham, and that's because, interestingly, and was this a wise decision? Probably. Digital wanted to expand. It had so many buildings in Reading, but as I understand it, the council wouldn't allow it. They didn't want all their eggs in one basket. Don't know whether that was a rumour or true. The result was this new building they needed. They built it down, or took it over down near Fareham. You could argue that was probably a wise decision ultimately. But.
So let's talk about, just coming to the end, the endings of DEC. I mean, you joined in 81, I think.
Yeah.
You were there for quite some time. You referenced several times being owned by Compaq and HP.
Yeah.
What was the feeling? I mean, you obviously, you had what, 25 years there with the company through
Total.
different brands of ownership.
29 and a half years.
That's a substantial part of your life. How did it feel to see, because the Compaq and HP acquisitions are quite concentrated at the end of the life of the company.
Yeah.
How did it feel to see that going down like that?
When Compaq took us over, I don't think there was any hint that was going to happen. Not at our level, anyway. In fact, I can remember we were working on a BT project, internal meeting in DEC Park, and our project manager knocks on the door, comes in and says, "Oh, you heard the news?" No, just been taken over by Compaq. And it's like, you could have heard a pin drop. I mean, Compaq? IBM, maybe. In fact, who else could? You know, even HP wasn't, in IT terms, competitive, as you know. But Compaq, I mean, they make laptops, don't they? And I mean, I still maintain that if it's not already discussed, but in years to come, skullduggery will be uncovered there. Because Ken Olsen, the founder, had been ousted by that time. And for a company like Compaq to take over digital... Was
it seen why? Because they were a PC company versus the big systems company, seen as being the upstart?
But I don't think... I mean, this was really before the days when everyone was having their own laptop and stuff at home, so they weren't huge. I mean, the HP takeover of Compaq, well, there you go. How come Compaq only lasted, whatever it was, 3 years before they themselves were taken over with digital?
So there was a sense of shock at the Compaq acquisition?
Oh, that was a big shock.
Nobody saw it coming?
Never, well, not at our level we didn't, no, not at all.
Did you sense change was coming in any way by this point? Trouble in the works?
Well, the first big redundancies had happened in digital in '92. In fact, some people would argue the first ever redundancies. I don't know how true that is, but the first big redundancies happened in '92. And in fact, yes, what I forgot to say, I did a spell in marketing. Same job, technical support to a marketing manager. And I was in marketing when the big axe fell, the first big axe, and they got rid of half the marketing people. And then I was called into an office and asked if I'd take over the marketing job for the product I'd been working with. Of course I said yes. And I went back to my, what? I've got no marketing experience, no qualifications, nothing. All they see me as, I'm obviously cheaper than the guy they've got rid of. So having said yes, I then had a word with people I knew down in Basingstoke, and I got a job down back doing real work. You know, so that was weird. That was, but that was the first big redundancies that came with digital. And
were they a shock? Because obviously digital for years have resisted redundancies, haven't it?
Yeah. I guess it was a shock. I don't know, maybe we were so busy that we just, right, you know, that sort of thing. So I always remember getting a massive pay rise because the first redundancies were voluntary, and the job market had been pretty bad up to around that point. And I think when this voluntary thing came up, people started looking around, and surprise, surprise, they could get more money elsewhere. And so they were volunteering left. I didn't want to leave for various reasons, and kids and everything like that, security, and it was really bad because you had all these people on the photocopiers photocopying their CVs for jobs, and suddenly a load of us got a massive pay rise, like 12% pay rise, and obviously the company was really panicking that they'd lose so many people if they didn't do something. So but that was the first redundancies. There's a story, once again, I don't know how true this is, but being French, it sounds right. They put a voluntary scheme out in digital France, and what they hadn't realised was the French unions negotiated as if you volunteered for redundancy, you had to be accepted. Whereas here, you volunteered and they just get rid of all the crap. But people were still leaving anyway because they found there was a lot more money. But yeah, in France, people, virtually everyone volunteered and they had to be accepted. And the powers that be hadn't realised that.
So you stayed on, you got a massive pay bump as a result, strangely enough. Yep. And then that's after the Compaq acquisition happens after that?
After that, yeah. So that would have happened about 93, and I think the Compaq thing happened about 98.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess probably in that 5-year period, the good times were over.
And what was it during the HP acquisition? So the HP acquisition came along, surprised by that one? Did you see that coming?
Yeah, I was working on a telecoms project in Switzerland, sitting in the customer's project office.
Knock on the door.
And the competition was for this, because it was more of a data comms project, competition was HP OpenView. Of course, we'd been telling the customer what a heap of rubbish HP OpenView was, couldn't do anything. And then someone came in one day and said, "Guess what? Been taken over by HP." Sort of. Right, now about HP OpenView. Yeah, that was a shock, yeah. But it was like coming home. I remember, it took about a year for the dust to settle. You know, I remember two colleagues and I were asked to go to this internal conference in Copenhagen for telecoms. So a lot of HP people there. And first thing I remember was we were treated like God. It was like, there's the 3 DEC digital compact people join. But it was just like coming home. You know, the sort of people I was dealing with were just, they could have worked for digital. Whereas, so I always viewed that as quite a good thing. The main difference I remember about HP and DEC was everything. Every email you got from HP management was from Palo Alto, and most of it didn't apply to you because you were in the UK. You know, it might be pay, I don't know, you know, conditions, something to do with change, HR type stuff. We never had that with digital. Never. It was always from the UK. So it always struck me that digital was a lot more focused locally on its local subsidiaries, whereas HP just looked at everyone as the same. Which, because towards the latter period, I managed 12 other solution architects, which was the job title. And I remember 2 of the guys were middle-aged and unmarried. And every one of these pieces of HP email came, they'd phone me, "Richard, I don't agree with this." You know, I was just ignore it. It's not relevant. You know, well, I can remember thinking, these 2 guys just want to get married, get a wife, get some kids. That'll knock the perfection. None of the married guys. I remember that. But yeah, that's what I noticed. HP was seemed to be a lot more corporate focused, whereas HP was a lot more communication was done at the subsidiary level.
Subsidiary level.
Yeah.
So finally, just thinking about, so you left eventually. What was the forcing factor, and how did you feel about that after that time?
When I finished work,
you left HP by this point. How come you left HP after having gone through the acquisitions?
Well, 2011 I left, so the HP takeover was 2001, you know, you get talking to your mates, and we'd concluded if you wanted to get the redundancy terms for digital employees were very generous, especially if you'd been in before 1997. And the question is, how do you get it? And we used to joke and say, you need a job that's got international in the job title, program in it, and have you got strategic as well? You know, you're in the international team for the XY as a program initiative. You're probably going to get made redundant. Anyway, I did get a job abroad, like a firefighting role, based in the UK, but I was for the last 4 years where I was working. And then I had an Italian boss, and he rang me up. Well, I'd said to him over a beer sort of thing various times, I said, you know, Domenico, if you need to get rid of anyone, I'm old, got kids are left home, no mortgage, you know, he got all these young guys with their kids, you know, appealing to his Italian sort of nature. And then one day in early 2011, he rang me up and said, do you want to take redundancy, Richard? So I said yes. And yeah, I finished, my last day was the day Kate and William got married. It was a bank holiday, so I didn't have to go in. But yeah, but the redundancy terms were very, very good, much better than had I worked for HP all those years. I never understood this. Redundancy terms seem to relate to the pension scheme you were part of.
So the HP redundancy was good for DEC employees, I think you said.
Yes, but of course it was based on the fact that a lot of my pension was tied up in digital pension schemes, not the latter years, that was HP. But yeah, I mean, it was, what was it? It was a month for every year's service, month's salary for every year, plus 3 months if you didn't work your notice, plus 3 months because I always understood it was the law, but various things have happened lately in the press. But I understood that you could never make a person redundant. You make their job redundant. and then you give the opportunity to find a job in the company. And HP would give you 3 months to do that. But if you didn't take it, they'd pay you another 3 months. Whereas I think if I'd been working for HP all that time, the maximum redundancy was 6 months' salary.
So tell us then, so DEC is now completely gone. What's the kind of legacy, I guess, for you or for the world at large, for you and for the world at large? How has DEC, I suppose, it moulded you or influenced you, or what's it left you? And then what do you think DEC's legacy on the world, for the world is?
DEC's legacy for the world? That's a big question, isn't it? What about for me first? I realised, I always knew it at the time, but I realised even more how lucky I was to work for that company. You go on these Facebook groups for old, and then you consistently read people say, I left DEC in 1997 and worked for, but Digital was by far the best company I ever worked for in my, because I didn't really have anything to compare to, really. Let's say I know Compaq and HP took it over, but really things didn't change for me. So I keep reading people who've flitted around, but maybe done 10 years in DEC, how it was the best company they ever worked for. And I'm thinking, and the other thing is, on a lot of these big bids we worked on, we worked with other companies. I remember there was a British company up in Hemel Hempstead, no names. We worked with them, and the culture in that company was incredible.
In what way?
Aggressive. I mean, it's just, I remember the way they talked to each other, shouted at just thought, I've never experienced that in Digital. Actually, it's funny because one day I'd gone up with a salesman to their offices and he was driving. And we were due to go back, and he was meeting the MD of the company, who I didn't know from Adam. But he came out of this meeting room with them, and he says, "Oh, Richard, have you met," he was Scottish, this guy, "you met Jock," whatever his name was, McLeod. I said, "No." And this guy, I thought, you wouldn't want to meet him down a dark alley, would you? He looked a real thug. Obviously, he was running a quite successful IT company. But I did think, it's just an example of how culture starts at the top, doesn't it? The DEC culture, Ken Olsen was a Quaker. Customer meetings, we weren't allowed to offer alcohol. It could be there, wine on the side, but we weren't allowed to offer it because of a Quaker. The salesman, lack of commission, I believe, was driven by his Quaker beliefs. And I think it filtered down, all the way down. And you go to this company and you meet all this aggression going on, and then you meet the guy in charge and you think, that's why.
So that's a good observation. What do you think it's left? Its kind of influence on you is then? What's been the DEC's legacy to you?
To me, just very thankful I work for DEC. Yeah, and Compaq and HP. I mean the whole thing really, the whole 29 and a half years. I really very lucky to have had that, especially, I left school 6 O-levels, 2 of which were bare passes. That's, how did I do that and never get made redundant? That's another thing, actually. How did I never get made redundant? Because I was a jack of all trades. I was never a master of any. So if you were the world's expert in a certain technology, and I saw it happen, and then that technology, they weren't going to ship anymore, or whatever, product or whatever. The next thing you know, the team had gone. And you'd think, but that guy's brilliant. Why'd they get rid of him? And you just knew that at management level, the easy thing was just get rid of everyone associated with that product. They're not going to, whereas I never had that tag, because I always moved around, and not deliberately. I wasn't deliberately moving around at all. It's just the way I am, really.
And what do you think DEC's long gone now? Does it have a legacy that's left the world, either culturally or in terms of its technology, or other factors? Or even Reading?
Well, I'd like to think what's happening here is part of that legacy, isn't it? So am I right in saying Digital was the first, if certainly the most significant IT player to move into Reading? Before Microsoft, before Oracle. Who else came? Not IBM, notably. Yeah, I mean, if I don't know. I've never really thought about the wider legacy of digital. Certainly left a good feeling, I think, for people who worked for the company. Yeah, and that in itself is a legacy. Mm.